Welcome back to 34, the podcast where we explore intimacy not as performance, but as presence. Not as something we do to each other, but as something we can co-create. Where we explore what it truly means to be present in our bodies, in our relationships, and in the stories we carry. This is not a podcast about technique, kink, or sex tips, even though we'll touch on all of these. At its core, 34 is about returning to the body, to the truth, to the breath we forgot to feel because someone told us to be quiet, or polite, or pretty, or small. Today's story is a powerful one. It's about Andrea, a woman of fire, softness, and sacred rage. A woman with South American roots. A woman raised in an environment shaped by religious shame, strict gender roles, and the unspoken rule that a woman's body was never quite her own, where silence often spoke louder than words. Andrea has experienced both spiritual awakening and unspeakable harm. She survived sexual assault, she's walked through numbness, and she's risen again and again, not by pretending she was whole, but by daring to feel the places that were broken. What she shares is not just a story of survival. Her story is one of inner strength, quiet rebellion, and a return to her own rhythm. It's a story of reclamation, of turning shame into knowing, and silence into sovereignty. Healing begins the moment we decide we are worthy of peace. Let's begin. Andrea grew up in a religious household where modesty was law and shame was stitched into everyday life. Expressions of the body were either sinful or sacred, but never safe. She was raised with rules, not touch. Obedience, not exploration. Pleasure, if mentioned at all, was always wrapped in sin. Her mother didn't speak of bodies, her church didn't speak of desire, and her own voice got lost somewhere in between. She learned early on that to be desirable, you had to be small, that to be loved, you had to be quiet. So she shrank in posture, in hunger, in want. Andrea was 11, maybe 12, when she first began to meditate. Not because someone taught her, but because she needed another path. She grew up surrounded by religious dogma, shame around the body, and an invisible wall between spirit and sensuality. So she sat quietly, searching for peace, for breath, for a place inside her that felt like her own. But that safety didn't come easily. Her stepfather's words and actions left invisible bruises that took years to name. The place that should have offered comfort became a place of tension, fear, and confusion. In her larger family, someone older, someone trusted, began to pay her the wrong kind of attention, not with violence, but with manipulation, words that blurred boundaries, touches that confused her body. She didn't have the language for it then, but today she calls it for what it was: grooming. Still, she longed to be loved, to be seen. As she entered adulthood, Andrea tried to create connection, reaching for something real. She chose her first partner with care and insight, on a trip where for a moment she felt free. But it wasn't someone she would build a future with. In another relationship, she became a mother. But what she hoped would be a stable foundation began to crumble. Not from noise, but from silence. And at night, When her son lay sleeping beside them, her partner would reach for her, not with love, not with tenderness, but with entitlement, as if her body was still his, even when her soul had withdrawn. She would freeze, dissociate, go quiet. One morning she woke up with him inside her, and something inside her finally said, "No more." It wasn't just the act, it was the stealing of presence, the assumption that she had no voice. And that's when the path back began. Healing didn't come overnight, but it started with movement, with breath, with yoga. Not as exercise, but as remembering. Andrea learned to inhabit her body again, to stretch the tension, to cry in child's pose, to shake with anger and funnily let it pass. And then came tantra, not the over-sexualized version on Instagram, but the real work. The inner journey, the stillness, the sacredness of sensation. She found teachers who didn't ask her to be anyone but herself. She began to ask, what do I want? What does my body long for? Not with what I have been taught to give, but what I've never dared to receive. She realized that safety was not a place, but a state of being. That wholeness was not about fixing, but about remembering who she had been all along. She began to live in her body again, not as something to be judged, but as something sacred. Andrea's sensuality didn't come rushing back, it came in waves. In small moments, when she dared to stay present, when she allowed herself to moan without guilt, to explore without shame. She lit candles, touched herself slowly, not for release, but for reconnection. Some days she cried instead of coming. Other days she laughed from the pure surprise of feeling pleasure again. She explored breathwork, learned how to speak her needs, and gradually she built a map, not of technique, but of truth. The moment she remembers the most? The first time she made love after reclaiming her body and actually woke up with someone still inside her. But this time it wasn't assault, it was presence, it was safety, it was everything she had once been denied. Andrea now stands in her full light, not healed in every way, but alive in every way. She teaches other women now. She speaks about trauma, embodiment, sensuality, and most of all, about the importance of not hiding. She says, your voice is not too much. Your desire is not dangerous. Your truth will not break the ones meant to hold you. She allowed herself to be held, seen, and supported. And in that space, she found something even deeper than resilience. She found peace. She didn't need to perform strength anymore. She could simply be. She could say yes. She could say no. And both would be honored. She stopped asking if she was too much. She started asking if the world could meet her exactly as she was. Andrea is not just a survivor. She is a mirror to every woman who is frozen in the dark and still dare to search for the light. So with that, to Andrea, and to every other person who has ever questioned their worth, their voice, their story, you are not too loud. You are not too sensitive. You are not too intense. You are exactly who you were meant to be before the world told you to shrink. You are still here. You are healing. And you are not alone. So again, before we wrap up, I want to welcome back Britta, who's a sexologist, relationship and intimacy coach, And as we know, she adds a very nice, deeper layer to these conversations. And she's been listening to this story about Andrea as well. Nice to have you back, Britta.
Hi, Henrik.
So, what are your key takeaways from the story about Andrea?
For me, Andrea's story represents also a very, very common story, whom I see in many of my clients actually. And it's the story about religious or cultural, deep rooted shaming of sexuality in the first place. Then also the story of abuse, abusive
Yeah,
relationship patterns. And I mean, it's a very common thing for women. But I'm not, I will never get tired to also point out that for a lot of men, there is this layer of sexual abuse and it's not as often talked about in our culture. And so, if you have experienced this in your upbringing, this strong, be it a religious or cultural shaming of pleasure, of sexuality, sensuality, it's a pretty difficult point to start at, aiming for a liberated and pleasurable sexuality.
exactly. And what do you think men can learn from this to also become better partners and meet the women in a better way?
Well, if you're a man, if you're a heterosexual man and you're dating women, you will meet a lot of women who have a history of sexual assault. That's probably one thing that you can take away from it. Because often I have clients and they're like, wow, I always seem to attract women who have had some history of sexual trauma. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, but that's a high percentage of women who have had probably not as extreme situations as Andrea. Yeah, she had this in her closer family circle, I think you said, yeah, or
Yeah,
and but still, to some degree, most women have experienced it, and it's something sort of to see it as it is and to deal with it. And then also, I mean, what men also can learn from this is it's not, of course, if you have a partner who has gone through this, there are things you can do to help her. But in the end, it's also about her choosing to to embark on this journey as Andrea did, right? I mean, she went for her healing journey. She went for yoga, breathing, reconnecting with her body, the tantric journey. And so, of course, as a partner, you can help her with that. You can support her with that. But on a deeper level, it's also her decision to want to meet herself in that.
yeah. I know. For me, I think one thing maybe I'm thinking of as well is how men show up in a better way for women in general. Because, as you said, there are so many women who's been going through this
Mm-hmm.
or experienced these type of sexual assaults.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I would say that is not okay in that sense, but also then how much better the relationship for you as a man, as well as for the woman, will be when you're meeting each other in a nicer way.
And a loving and compassionate and I mean, we always keep repeating it, but this being present with what is, and it's really a
Yeah,
skill you can learn. One thing I want to add though at this moment, Henrik, is I think it's really important as a man to not feel guilty, because I've also met men who sort of started to feel shame and guilt for being a man in a culture
yeah,
where there has been a lot of conflicts around, and it's not sort of you're not guilty. Yeah, so you don't help anybody, you don't help your partner by feeling guilty for something that you haven't done. But then of course it's to really see, as a woman or a man, how can I become a better partner in general? How can I become a better person? And how can I prevent these things from happening? Be it by becoming more present around those dynamics, be it like for Andrea as a woman, to learning set boundaries, communicate my truth. Yeah.
it's very important. And then, what can women take with them from Andrea's journey for themselves as well as in the relationships they're in?
Yeah. So again, I think the deepest thing, the most important message is that healing is possible.
Yeah.
So if you've experienced this, like it's not your fault. I mean, it's really it's a as I said in the beginning, it's a difficult starting point because we tend to compare ourselves to other people and how they are doing on their journey. And let me tell you, if you started with a strong religious upbringing and a lot of shame around sexuality, that's a difficult starting point to start with. If you've experienced sexual assault, some kind of sexual trauma in you, it doesn't matter. As a child, it's really it's sort of very bad. But also as a young woman, as an adult woman, it doesn't matter. It's something. It can leave a deep imprint, but you can change. It basically pleasure is the antidote to trauma.
Yeah. Which is a nice way to look at it. Shame actually will be one of the upcoming themes in quite a few of the episodes we're going to be listening to, because it's something I've seen now with no matter which religion or religious upbringing you have, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jew, or something, it's sort of something that is prevailing, particularly in the Abrahamic religions, if you will, where shame is sort of something that is being opposed on women in general, particularly, but also on men in many ways, right?
It's a deep thing about monotheistic religions that, yeah, you have this shame, and it's also a way of controlling people and keeping them small. And if you break through the patterns of shame, which is something is inherent wrong with me,
Yeah.
and guilt, which is about I have done something that is considered wrong, on your path to liberation, to sexual liberation, you will have to face these things. And if you, yeah, sort of not break through, but if you consistently change it, it will make you a so much happier and also freer person.
I agree on that. Thank you so much, Britta.
Thank you.
In the book version of 34, Andrea's chapter goes even deeper. It follows her full emotional arc from silence to storm to serenity. But here we hold the essence. Let it meet something inside you. In our next episode, we meet Sarah and Peter, two people who turned their relationship into a living practice of presence. We'll hear how trust, attention, in daily rituals become their most powerful form of connection. Until then, take a breath, be gentle. You are already enough.